Previously, we look at an exercise. Let's look at that exercise again. Consider the market for minivans. In each of the following events, identify which of the determinants of demand is affected and indicate an increase or decrease in demand for minivans. Since we are just covering the concept, we're just beginning to cover these concepts, it is important that we go slowly, step by step. Okay? So I would like you to approach this type of question by first asking yourself which determinants of demand is most relevant here, and then we can go from there. So let's start with the first one. People decide to have more children. When you go over the list of determinants of demand that we went over last time, which one do you think is most relevant here? Let's give it a pause. You can turn off the video and then think about it a little bit. Or go over the list of the determinants of demand again. Okay, when you think about it, the people decide to have more children. Okay, so which determinant is most relevant here? So since we're just beginning to cover these concepts, so I'm writing the determinants out explicitly. But in the near future, when you're familiar with these concepts, you don't have to spell them up explicitly, but instead you can put them in words that include the determinant. So some of you may start to think about tastes and preferences, right? So as people decide to have more children, they decide to have larger family, they need more room, they like bigger cars. Okay? So as people decide to have more children, they prefer to have more space. A bigger car. That's a minivan. That's because a minivan is a bigger car. Okay? So as a result, what will happen to the demand? Okay? So the demand for a minivan will increase. Some of you may say one of the determinants of demand that is most relevant here is the number of buyers or the number of potential buyers. Okay. So the same story goes, right? Okay? As people decide to have larger family, okay, they have more demand for, okay, so as more people decide to have larger family, they have more demand for larger cars, such as minivans. Okay? So either way, we will see an increase in the demand for minivans. Okay. So just so you're familiar with how we conduct our courses, in most economics courses, to answer questions like this, we don't necessarily look for very, very long answers, as long as it's concise and clear. Okay? So lastly, we want to help answer the questions with the help of a demand curve. Okay? So what you can see here is the market of minivan, the price of minivans, and the quantity of minivans on each axis respectively. And then, as we have previously talked about, an increase in demand is indicated by a rightward shift of the demand curve. Okay, so we go from D1 to D2. Okay? So that's a sample of how we answer similar questions. Okay? So we're going to quickly go over the next two before we move on to the supply. So the second scenario, the price of sports utility vehicles rises. The price of sports utility vehicles rises, SUV. The price of SUV goes up. So let's pause the video for a couple seconds and think about the determinants of demand that is most relevant here. Once again, if you want to, you can go back to the list of the determinants of demand. Okay, so once again, since we are just beginning to cover this concept, so we want to take things very slowly. So you will find me spelling out these determinants explicitly. But in the future, if you feel that is suitable, then you don't have to spell them up explicitly, but instead you can incorporate them in words in your answers. Okay, so what is likely to be the most relevant determinant here? I'm sure most of you realize that SUV is just another type of bigger cars. Okay. So in a way, SUV and minivans, they are substitutes. Okay. So minivans and sports utility vehicle, just SUVs, okay, are substitutes. As the price of SUV rises, consumers, people, are less likely to buy SUVs. If they still want a big car, they may turn to minivans. As a result, the demand for minivan goes up or increases. Okay. So here we go. Once again, in addition to explanation in words, we will also want to explain it with the help of a diagram, specifically a demand curve. Okay? So we're looking at an increase in demand, okay, for minivans. Okay, so the next one, a stock market crash. The last one, the last question, let's go back. The stock market crash lowers people's wealth. Okay, so when the stock market crashed, share prices, stock prices plummeted. One of the most direct effect is people's wealth gets wiped out, and that is the most direct effect. Although in the list that we covered previously, we did not mention wealth, but it is close enough. We did mention income. But do bear in mind that income and wealth, they are not necessarily the same thing. Some people, they don't work, they still have wealth. They may have inherited some from the parents, or they may have saved over time, accumulated some wealth. So they're not necessarily the same thing, but close enough. Okay? So once again, let's look at the last question. So a stock market crash lowers people's wealth. Okay. So one of the determinants okay, the determinant that is most relevant here, we can put wealth, okay? Or if you prefer, you can also put income, okay? Both is acceptable, okay? So as wealth decreases, the demand for everything, okay, including for most goods and services, including minivans, decreases. In fact, if you look back at the economic history of the United States, every time there's a downturn in the economy, every time there's a recession, we do see the auto industry very, very hard hit. So auto cars, they are very much sensitive to people's wealth. Okay, so lastly, we will look at the diagram and the illustration of the answer, okay? A leftward shift of the demand curve. Okay? So I hope that helps answering the questions.